Welcome to episode 297 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak encouragement into the hearts of educators and get you informed and energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking about how to emphasize feedback in your assessment of students so they care about their learning and not just the grades. Visit truthforteachers.com for an easy-to-read, easy-to-share version of this podcast episode. Elevate your career in early child development at Erickson Institute, a trusted and respected premier graduate school. Erickson's online master's in early childhood education provides the expertise to lead initiatives that shape young minds. Balancing your life, work, and studies is made easier with this fully online program, offering part-time or full-time study options. Join a community of nationally recognized faculty and learn alongside experienced practitioners. Apply today at erickson.edu. That's ERIKSON.edu. So last year in 2023, I hosted the very first 40-hour Teacher Workweek online summit. This is the only free event that is focused entirely on saving teachers time and helping you do your job more effectively and efficiently. So last summer, we had over 10,000 teachers attend the summit and got so much positive feedback, in large part because I designed it in a way that every single one of our presenters was a current K-12 classroom teacher, sharing exactly what works in their workload with their students in their daily practice. All of the presenters from the summit were also from our 40-hour Teacher Workweek community. So we've had around 60,000 teachers go through the program, and this is an opportunity for them to share how they have streamlined their work and what is effective for them now through the summit. So I definitely wanted to do the summit again this year, and I decided to move it up to the spring and do it so that there's a keynote for me on Friday night, and then the sessions run during the day Saturday. So I'm moving it up. It's going to be in April this year. I'm also splitting it into two different weekends, one for elementary teachers and one for secondary teachers. One thing that's going to be the same this year is that the summit is still going to be free to attend. I do pay our presenters because I don't believe in asking teachers to do more unpaid labor. That's kind of my whole thing, right? It's like stop working for free. So I do offer an honorarium for everyone who presents for us. And I run this event at a pretty big expense to me personally, but the value that it adds to the teaching community and the way that it really highlights what's going on in the 40-hour program is worth it, and it is a labor of love to me. So if this is something that you believe in and you want to support the summit and you want to benefit from all the great ideas that other teachers are sharing, there's a couple different things that you can do. The first is to sign up for the free live event. Come and participate. We have a live chat during the session so that you can interact with other teachers and ask questions and answer questions. That's one thing that you can do. The second is to share this event with your colleagues and your educator friends. So help us spread the word about this free online summit. You can share the link with them. It's join.40htw.com/summit. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but the link is in the show notes. You can also just go to 40htw.com and you'll see an announcement for the summit at the top. So sign up, spread the word. And the third way to support the summit, to support this work, and to benefit from this work is to purchase the Forever Access. So this is only $19. It made it as affordable as I possibly can. And that just helps me recover some of the costs of running this as a free event and for paying our presenters. So for $19, you get the transcripts, you get note-taking guides, and you can watch any of the sessions on demand. And I think that's especially useful if you want to watch things for other grade levels. So if you are a secondary educator, there's quite a few elementary sessions that will be valuable for you and vice versa. This way, you don't have to attend both weekends. You can just watch anything that you want to watch. You can fast forward, you can rewind, etc. So purchasing that Forever Access for $19 is available now. And again, all of those links are in the show notes. Now, how does all of this about the summit tie into today's topic of feedback first? Well, you are going to hear a sneak peek from two of our sessions for the summit. So both of these teachers that you're going to hear from talking about feedback first Perhaps not coincidentally, both teach at International Baccalaureate schools, referred to as IB schools. And they have some really innovative ways of approaching feedback because of the type of schools that they teach in. First up, you're going to hear from Andrea Clark. She is presenting for the Elementary Summit in a session called Feedback First, shifting from traditional grading to reflection sessions. Then you're going to hear from Tanya Jo Woodward. She's presenting for the Secondary Summit, and her session is called 7 Time Savers for IB and AP teachers, AP meaning Advanced Placement. Like so much of the Summit content, I think you'll find value for almost any grade level and any content area you teach. I'm just giving you a little background as to where they're coming from. So let's get into it. Let's listen to this sneak peek from Andrea's Summit presentation, in which she shares her experience with getting her 5th graders engaged with her feedback instead of just focusing on their grades. She's going to share something that she does just with big end-of-unit tests and other major assessments. This is not a process that she does for every single assignment that she gives to students, just the big things. She wants kids to care about and engage with the learning process and really self-reflect, not look at their grades and then toss the paper in the trash can. So I'm sort of summarizing this here first because this podcast is audio only, and of course her Summit presentation is showing you the visual example. So I want to make sure you understand what it is you're about to hear. When she's grading these major assessments, she takes notes on the patterns that she notices with the class, what she sees as a whole a lot of people are doing well on, and what a lot of students are struggling with. She also takes screenshots or photos of outstanding work as she grades. Not necessarily like things that are absolutely perfect, but things like, this person used some really rich vocabulary here, or the headings that this person used in their essay are really clear and easy to understand. And then she puts those screenshots or images and her notes about what the class did well and what was difficult into a presentation. And she adds some reflection questions for students to discuss with their groups. Now, creating this slideshow presentation sounds like a lot of work. However, remember, she's only doing this for the big assessments, for the big tests, the end of unit type of things. And she's using the same template every time. It's only about 6 to 10 slides. So all she has to do is just copy paste into there what the class did well on, what they're struggling with, a couple screenshots of exemplars, and she can often just even reuse the same reflection questions. So it's not a ton of work for her up front, and as you will hear from her description of the process, it is one of the most worthwhile ways that she spends her time as a teacher because her students learn so much from it. Listen in.
Last year, when I passed back grades, I would usually make some general statements about the assessment, how the class did overall. Usually it was even more general than that. Like, everyone did really well, or we did better on this assessment than the last one. Almost nothing specific about the content. I don't know really how well the students were listening. They were all looking at me, but many of them were probably just wanting me to pass back the tests already. As soon as I told them to put their assessment in their backpack, they immediately started talking about their grades. But that was it. Only their grades. Some were happy, some were disappointed, some shared freely, some didn't like to share at all. Almost no reflection happened on the assessment other than general feelings of happiness or disappointment at their grades. No one talked about what they learned or how they were disappointed that they hadn't given their full answer on this one problem. And that was a good day. On a bad day, I would pass back their grades as they left the room, so I wouldn't even get those general feelings about their grades. This year, when I passed back grades, I wanted to do something different. The students don't see their grades at all at first. The first thing they see is a presentation where I go through the assessment with them. Not every question, but the things that I think are important to highlight or might come back around in the future. Throughout the process, the students do a lot of talking, reflecting on the assessment with a group of their classmates, sometimes even sharing these reflections out to the whole group. Then I pass back the assessment with my written feedback on it, but not the grade. Students have time to read through the feedback. I'm walking around the room answering questions. They then do a short written reflection, which they show me before I finally give them their grade. And then all the usual talking and sharing of grades happens. They're still 5th graders. They're going to talk and share their grades. But that's not the only thing they've done. Now, That's what my process looks like in the class. That's what the process looks like when I'm doing this with my students. But a lot of work has to go into, I have to put in a lot of work before that. What I do before, as I'm grading, I keep track of the feedback that I'm giving to students, especially the feedback that I tend to be giving over and over. And I try to not only focus on the negative things, but also the positive things. I like to grade one question at a time for non-writing assignments. And this is easy so it's easy to write down the kind of common comments that I'm writing because I look at everyone's question 1 before I move on to question 2, for example. I work at an IB school, so all of the grading is rubric based, even for math. I keep written comments on a separate page from the rubrics that have the grade on them. So I have the students' rubrics, and then I have either as like a separate page or sometimes even a separate document where I have the written comments on them. I have long typed comments in order to copy and paste similar feedback to different students, so this works really well with this process. After I'm done with the grading, I make the PowerPoint presentation that follows kind of this general pattern. What went well for us as a class? Usually 3 to 5 things. What was hard for us? Again, usually 3 to 5 things. And examples of student responses that I want to highlight. Usually they're from our class, but I might pull a particularly good example from other classes if necessary. And this is for questions or parts of the assignment that I want to highlight. For example, a hook. Good examples of hooks in English, or a well-designed poster that they might do in social studies. I use screenshots, photographs, or even typed up responses if the assessment was written by hand. At this point, I am ready to pass back the assessment. Now, I need 15 to 20 minutes to do this in class, so I can't just tuck it in. This isn't a 5-minute at the end of class thing. This is often something I like to start a class with, not only because I think it's important, but because I want to make sure that I have time for it and I don't want to rush any of the reflection parts of it. So I have the grades, I have the PowerPoint, I have the time. Now I go through the presentation with them. I would ask the students, with the people at your table, what went well for you? Share something with your group. It can be something from this slide or something else that you remember went well from the assessment. I give the students about a minute to do that. I'm walking around, and then I ask if anyone is willing to share with the whole class. As the year has gone on, more and more people volunteer to share things that go well. Some read directly from one of the points on my slide. Others come up with totally different things that I hadn't even thought of, which is also it's just also interesting feedback for me. Then I go through what was hard for us, and I do this, and I read through it, and I do the same process. Talk about it with the people in your group. What was hard for you? Was it one of these things, or was it something else? I walk around. I ask students to share. I'm even at this point in the year having more and more students sharing things that were hard for them. So they're not only sharing the positives, but they're also being risk takers and sharing the things that were challenging for them. I try to keep this part kind of light and funny. So not to dwell on how bad it is to make a mistake, but like, this is something that was hard for everyone. We're 5th graders. We're still learning. Here are some things that I noticed, the same kind of mistakes that we were just making over and over and over again. So you're not alone. You're not the only one making the mistake. I highlighted examples of what a good poster looked like. And then I asked the students why. Why are these good posters? And I don't say these are perfect posters. This is what I have. So none of these were the most amazing posters I've ever seen. But since we took time to talk about posters before the presentation, I wanted to make sure to highlight good examples of posters in this presentation. And students raised their hand and told me, oh, this one had a big picture, balanced text in words. The title was easy to see, whatever the kind of things were that we talked about and that they noticed from this. Then here are some written responses that I wanted to highlight as well. At this point, I could ask students to read them out loud. What did the student do well? How does your response compare? But I try to keep this part moving along because I know at this point, students are starting to really be thinking about their assessment and are wanting to kind of see how they did compared to these answers. So then after, this is kind of the end of my presentation. Now the students kind of take over the reflection. They take over the reflection part. They go into OneNote and open up a document that we have stored there and we've been using all year. And they fill out a reflection assessment table that they and I have access to on OneNote. They put in the subject. Since I teach multiple subjects, it's all in one document, so they have to say that it's math. Then they list the title, and they have 2 columns. What went well for you? What would you do differently next time, and why is that important? Those last 2 are in the same column together. Once they have completed this table, I give them back their grades. I like to check through it, at least read through to make sure that they answered the question, why is it important? I don't just want students to say, oh, I should have written more details. Why should you have written more details? Why is that important? Why is that important to you? Why is that important to someone else? And once they've done that, I give them back their grade, and then they start sharing their grades. But it doesn't bother me the way that it did last year, because it's not the only thing they've talked about. At this point, they've shared several things, either to the whole class or even just to their group. And they've done some actual learning about this assessment, and it isn't just so focused on like what they did well on, what they didn't do well, just on just the grade. I like that students think about more than just the grade, and that they see that many of their classmates make the same mistakes that they do. I think that really lowers the stakes on assessments, especially for anxious students who feel like everything they do is wrong or they always make a mistake. It's like, talking about the assessment is now like a thing that we do. It's not some secret thing where you're only talking about the grade. It's something that we do to learn and grow from each other and reflect on our own assessment. Passing back grades just feels more meaningful now because the grade they get is attached to something. It's attached to an actual conversation about what students had to do to get a higher grade. The students actually read my written feedback and reflect on it. A lot of what they put into their table on OneNote is something that I've written in the feedback. It isn't always, but sometimes it is. And it's going to be a great tool for student-led conferences. We're about to have them coming up, and I'm very excited to kind of pull this document up and talk about it with them and their families.
You can check out Andrea Clark's full presentation on this topic during the 40-hour Teacher Workweek online summit. So this is the free event I mentioned at the beginning. It's part of the elementary summit that's happening on April 6th. Her session's called Feedback First, shifting from traditional grading to reflection sessions. It's aimed at grades 2 to 5, but as you could tell, there is applicability to much higher grades as well. Andrea is also providing her presentation template to you as part of the summit to make it really easy for you to get started with these reflection sessions. So click the link in the show notes to sign up for the event, and I'll send you the link to join us live for free, and you can watch her full presentation. Now, here's a sneak peek at Tanya Jo Woodward's summit presentation, in which one of the time-saving tips that she shares is about making a shift around grading in her high school English classroom. She talks first about grading and giving feedback in class. So she talks about how while students are working independently on a task or an assessment, you can pull individuals over to provide feedback to them. She also discusses how you can teach students to better self-correct by providing editing stations or peer editing guided sheets. She has a few other great tips that really help her manage her grading and provide more efficient, effective feedback. Here's Tanya Jo Woodward.
I think it's also essential as we're thinking about time-saving strategies to think about to make grading manageable and meaningful. So here's a few strategies on how to do that. One that we can do is grade in class. Many IB assessments are timed, and I think it's important to use that to our advantage and to give timed assessments in class. That not only gives students time to practice the timed conditions, but also gives you a chance perhaps to mark. So in the next lesson, you could try this. After students have finished some work, you could set aside some other independent work for them to work on, and then mark their major assessment in a writing conference style. So while other students are working on an independent task quietly, you can have the student come to you and they can read aloud their writing to you. And as they're reading it aloud, they'll be able to catch some mistakes or grammar things that they need to work on, or just even hear the sound of their own voice and the fluency in the piece that they wrote. And then you can ask the student as they're reading, what are you proud of? And what could you improve? And based on this rubric, I like to put the rubric right next to their work. What would you predict that you would get? And then I think using the same rubric that you would use for your IB assessment, explain again, what did they do well and where could they grow? It might seem more labor intensive, but I think it's actually a really powerful exercise that I did when I was teaching college writing that actually really helps create classroom community. It gives you a chance to get to know your students in this one-to-one setting, kind of tutoring style, and give them a little one-on-one attention, which they actually crave, but they won't ever ask for. And so that just kind of builds in that time for you. Another thing I like to do is give actionable feedback. So rather than marking every error on their paper, which is not effective, I like to work on, here are 2 things that you can work on, and 1 thing that you did really well, or vice versa. I think it's not an effective grading technique to correct every error in their essay. That's not really the purpose. Who's really editing then? You or them? And so I think it's important to, if you notice a pattern of errors, you can make a note of that and have the student go back and correct their work. But really at that point, there should hopefully be some different things in place for the student to be able to self-correct. And one way that you can teach students how to better self-correct is to give them editing stations or peer editing guided sheets. So what I like to do is take the same rubric that I'm going to mark students and pass it out to the students and have them trade and mark each other's and give predicted feedback or a predicted score on the assignment, and then they can revise and resubmit. Again, I think it's important to use the same rubric that you would use so students become familiar with the criteria that they're marked on or graded on, and that they also get familiar again with what they could do. And then I think it's helpful for students to also reflect at the end of this assignment, maybe keeping track or a little record of this. What are 2 things that they did well with this and something that they could work on? And so that's quite effective. I also think it's quite effective to give digital feedback where possible. I'm a faster typer than a writer. And while Google Classroom doesn't have a rubric system I really love, I currently copy and paste the rubric onto a student's typed work and then digitally highlight and type comments onto where their work kind of landed. And so I find that to be really helpful. Another thing I think is quite helpful is to pick a time or a day to do grading. So again, Wednesdays are bad for me because of our block schedule, but Fridays are a bit better. So just knowing that I can work on it on Friday and I add it to my Friday's to-do list is really helpful for me. I also like, again, to pick that specific day to work on the essay so it doesn't bleed over into all my life. So I'm not marking essays on Saturday afternoon, which I don't believe in doing. So another thing you can think about is only assigning what you have time to give meaningful feedback to. So if it's possible at your school, just like we kind of narrow it down to the main thing per day as teachers, could you narrow down the assignment to just 1 main thing for students to work on independently in extended kind of capacity for themselves? I also think you can ask questions. So research shows that asking questions instead of telling students things is actually better for generating ownership over their writing and also better at helping them improve their writing. I think asking students, why did you do this, or what does this mean, or connecting it back is one way that you can kind of show students that writing is intended to be a dialogue, not just a one-way monologue, but a together kind of conversation. And so that by having this sort of question asking and dialogue, it really puts the teacher in the place of a co-learner instead of this sort of like all-knower, which I think is helpful for students to see. And finally, another thing you could think about doing is to use contract grading. I did this more with university students, but I think there's a real place for it in the high school classroom. And so perhaps you could change the way that you assess so that students just have to achieve a level of a pass, or maybe a try again if they didn't pass in the contract grading. If you'd like to know more about that, I've got some more links. But I think making work that's more effort-based and equitable really helps our students who maybe aren't our top earners, but really do want to learn and grow, which is really the core idea of the IB curriculum. It's not about just everybody getting the top score in the 7. That's really nice. But really we want to form these students as lifelong learners and able to kind of encounter and communicate in various situations, which is really the purpose.
You can hear all of Tanya Jo Woodward's tips on April 13th during the Secondary Teachers Online Summit. Her session is called 7 Time Savers for IB and AP Teachers, and it's aimed for grades 6 to 12, but as you can tell, is still a useful listen for teachers of younger students as well. Click the link in the show notes to sign up for the 40-Hour Teacher Workweek online summit, and I will send you the link to join us live for free. The elementary event is April 5th to 6th, and the secondary event is April 12th to 13th. You can choose which event to sign up for, and I'll only send you an email about the event for your grade levels, but you'll still have access to all the sessions. So if there's something from the other grade level summit that you want to check out, you will have access to that as well. And as I mentioned, if you can't attend live or the event has already passed by the time you listen to this, you can purchase forever access to all the sessions, both elementary and secondary, and get your transcripts, note-taking guides, and all the presentation links in one document so that you can reference them easily. Forever access is $19, and the link is in the show notes. I hope you have enjoyed this sneak peek from the 40-Hour Teacher Workweek online summit. These are just 2 of 30+ sessions. And while these 2 were focused on streamlining how you give feedback, the rest of the summit will give you tips for organization, lesson planning, and more. Go to 40htw.com to learn more. Have a great week. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it.